Hi everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Emilia Ciardi and I am a developer and UX designer from Italy. I currently work for IGT and also more recently for Sparkling Labs, which is a mobile apps startup based in Switzerland. Today's talk will be about mobile UX design and goes through a sort of decalogue, a set of 10 guidelines that is meant to have a double interpretation or value. For designers, the guidelines can be used as a toolbox to help tackle the design of our next successful app. But on the other hand, if you are managers or maybe we are developers and probably the design of our app will be done by some external designer, then these guidelines can be effectively used as a sort of checklist to see if the direction of the design we are proposed is actually a promising one. So all of us is well aware that the app market is overcrowded, and in this scenario we know that every new app is bound to face a severe competitive market and which will undergo severe also discoverability troubles. Now, addressing discoverability is really out of the scope of this talk, but it is important to understand that the role of mobile UX intervenes in this scene in a very precise phase of our business funnel. Basically, the acquisition phase for our apps is something that happens outside the app. At that moment in time, the user experience has already started, which means that the user has already got a contact with the brand image of our product, but at the same time, the mobile user experience intended as the real interaction with our app hasn't yet started. But it is when actually the user gets to download and launch our app that this all starts, and we see that the retention and monetization phases really are phases where the mobile UX and UI design can add value and show a significant strategic importance. Because basically, when we really want to monetize our apps, studies by players like App Annie shows that really we need to engage with the user at least for 2-3 weeks. So it is really important to try and engage users, to keep them within our apps, to let them adopt actually the app, to be able to get them successfully through all the business funnel. So how can we create a sticky and memorable user experience to help them, stay with us and go through the business funnel? To truly engage user, we have to work on 3 contiguous and partially overlapping realms. The first one is all about immaterial values. We really want our users to have both an emotional impact and to extract meaning from our app. We want them to feel cool because they're using a cool product, and we want also them to feel it relevant to their own lives. The second realm is about responsiveness and efficacy. The pleasure of use for apps is very dependent on how good we can make the app in terms of responsiveness. And last but not least comes the ease of use. Very few people in these hectic times can afford, the luxury of being patient with an intuitive app. So let's see how we can try and infuse these values into our design. So the first guideline is about designing task-oriented, user-centered flows. This guideline is really dense and implies a sort of change of perspective. First of all, we should put ourselves in the shoes of our users, because our design needs to be user-centered. Who is my user and what problems am I going to solve for him or her with my app? Only if I can answer this question, I'll be able to design a flow that is really task-oriented. The ideal answer clearly identifies a problem or maybe more to solve, which will translate in user journeys inside my app. I purposefully put this picture of a duck that is smoothly sliding on the ice. The message here is we can make even clumsy users feel like elegant skaters if we provide them with a nice and smooth ice surface to slide on. And this can be done only if we streamline our task in smooth flows that shows clear call to actions in every step. Another important guideline is about adding meaning and value to the UX. This implies the capacity to enrich the user experience and open it to new opportunities. Most of the apps that really break through and are actively adopted by users add a social dimension to activities. Think, for example, about Runtastic that enabled runners to share their usual tracks. Another enabling and meaningful factor are real-time notifications or information that are relevant to the user. Think about notification in real time for our favorite soccer matches or teams. In general, sharing and communication, synchronization, real-time notifications, and access to user ratings to build trust are all examples of elements that, on top of our services, of the functionalities that we are offering, can add value and meaning for users. For every user journey that is central to our app, we should try and imagine how we can add more meaning and value to it. Another very famous, guideline is less is more, be lean. Actually, this is a very general principle of design, but in the context of mobile apps, it is much more important and core to what we are doing, to what we should do. And it works in tandem with the first guideline. Because we already know that we have to design streamlined user journeys, well, these guidelines also tells us that we should focus on a few core journeys. So we should not try to do everything, but we should try to focus on solving a few core problems for our users, avoiding the kitchen sink pitfall and the potential of cluttering too much our app so that it is not efficient anymore for anything, actually. So less is more on mobile devices is truer than anywhere else, basically. And it's better to start small and keep an open mindset, listening to user feedbacks. This actually means to adopt a lean approach that comes from the startup philosophy of the lean approach. Adopting a lean approach means to adopt a learning loop approach that enables us to improve our product strategically. In the first place, we have to instrument our apps with analytics that can measure how we are doing, introducing quantitative key performance indicators, the famous KPI. Then we build and deliver the product to the market, very likely a minimum viable product, and then we measure our performances to learn and correct our design. This should go on for the entire life cycle of the product, of course. But how can we use data for our user experience? Basically, there is a realm of UX discovery. It means that we can use actually the analytics and the KPI collected for issue identification. This means that we can measure the drop-off of users in specific points of our app and of our flows, and so we really have a clear guidance on where we have to correct our design. But we also can use it for strategic guidance, because if for example, we measure that users are really neglecting some of our journeys, maybe those functionalities are not really so important or so meaningful to users. Or maybe they are all working with a few journeys of our own, and so we know that we should invest in them because they are valuable. So it helps for strategic guidance and the next design, the next improvement on our design. And it is also about health monitoring. Once we have all our KPIs in place, of course we can easily detect if something is changed and needs a fix, basically. We can also use it for UX optimization, which means that basically we are able to precisely get project metrics that helps us to measure the performance before a specific UI or UX change and after. So we can really measure how we are doing and the efficacy of our new design. And we can also experiment with A/B and multivariate tests in scenarios where things are really a little bit unpredictable, and I really want to keep my options open and experiment with a few more options. Another important guideline is to remember that we are actually designing for small screens. This means that we have to consider, this is very trivial, the minimum hit area and make the most of the real screen estate that is available. The visual design should also reinforce the interactions. In other words, even if I have a small screen, I should carefully size and place the elements to ensure ease of use and indicate the importance and correlations of the elements so that related elements stay close and together. Now, the fact that we are designing for small screens may seem trivial, but it actually means that we have more pressure to respect ergonomics. What does it really mean is that we should be aware, at least, of the way we are used to hold mobile devices. Here we can see the results of a study conducted in 2013, so a little bit out of date, that analyzed this aspect. Basically, people were observed at random moments during their day and in random places, say at the bar or at a bus station, at home, to check how they were holding their devices while interacting. So the elements that were observed is that we have three main ways to hold on our devices: the one-handed, the cradled, and the two-handed, both in portrait or landscape mode. Another interesting discovery is that we actually change the way we hold our devices during the day and depending on the context. For example, a two-handed use has to be expected more likely when we are, say, relaxing at home on the sofa, whilst the one-handed use is extremely common when we are in a true mobility context. This is really important to realize because it has impacts on the ease of use and specifically on the thumb zone, which we can see as a sort of heat map that visualizes what areas of the screen can be comfortably reached with our thumbs. In green we see the area that we are very natural to reach and interact with. In yellow the stretch area, let's call it like that, and in red the blind spots, actually. Now, we can notice that optimizing the design for ergonomics in the case of one-handed use poses more challenges, say, if we compare it with the cradled use. And this is very, very intuitive to get. But what does it mean? Should we use, should we optimize our experience for the cradled use and take the easy path, for example? The answer, of course, is no. When designing our apps, we should think about the typical use of our app. For example, if it is a leisure or serendipity app that users will enjoy on their sofa with long and relaxed sessions, then this may hint at a cradled use or even a two-handed use in landscape mode. So we should really address this kind of use for our app. But maybe our app is not a leisure app, it is a convenience app, a convenience tool that people will use frequently while on the move. In this case, we should really strive to optimize our user experience for one-handed portrait use. And there's more to that. I mean, the time zone is actually evolving. As the screen size, grow bigger and bigger, our thumbs are really into troubles, into big troubles, and so are we as designers in a way. Even Apple acknowledged this issue and introduced with the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, because the blind spots were really, huge, introduced the reachability setting, which probably you know about it. It is all about, having the entire screen slide down so that even the blind spots become in reach of our thumb. But of course it is just patch. It is not a real solution. Fact is that the way to hold on our devices is actually shifting more and more in favor of the cradled use because of the size of the devices. So in short, we need to be aware of these issues and sort them out right from the start, optimizing our user experience for the most appropriate way, which is dependent really on our app and the imagined typical use pattern for our app. Another important guideline, the fifth one, is to leverage standard patterns. This means to use a familiar and consistent user interface language. We should give elements also a high affordance to point users to features in an interface. And we should also try and use context-based hiding so that we can enhance the user focus and save screen space. Now, today, if you're really serious about mobile UX, you should really study Material Design by Google. It is a truly beautifully designed and comprehensive visual language. No one is paying me for saying that, but it is really beautifully designed, that spans from mobile and desktop and even smart TV screens. The material metaphor is actually so powerful and elegant that some of its interaction patterns are actually crossing over and are being more and more adopted also on iOS apps. And this is very interesting for us as designers because it means we can save some, save some brain cells and try and have more cross-platform designs. So studying the material design specs can really help us to become better designers today. Another important guideline is to embrace gesture-intensive design. And we should try and make the experience with gesture feel really natural, like, like scraping an itch, something very, very, very natural and intuitive. For example, with the Flipboard app that you may remember, I'm sure, the flip transition is an integral part of the user interactions. It feels very natural, and its smooth implementation has been essential to the app's success. Using a metaphor in this way can allow the quick communications of a concept to users, as well as also help the app to stand out with a unique proposition, actually. Additionally, we are lucky because standards and patterns have emerged, and so also for developing gestures, and so we don't really need to reinvent the wheel every time. For example, the left and right swipes on table lists items currently can be seen in almost every mail client to access additional options on each email we have in our list. And gestures like this before were sort of a dark matter because they were really invisible to the users, and it was really hard to communicate to users, hey, you can do this easily using this gesture, but we are lucky because they are becoming more and more standard and more familiar to users. So let's see some interesting examples of gestures. For example, the flick. The flick has become really famous with Tinder right now in the realm of apps, but it was really born in the realm of gaming apps. You may probably recall Flick Soccer or games like that. Basically, with the flick gesture inside Tinder, we can easily say if we like or we want to pass on a person, or just a guy or a girl. And it's really a fresh take on the user experience for this kind of apps. And this really contributed to its success. Word of mouth and diffusion, like, you know, really endemic. So another interesting gesture interaction is the touch and hold. Here you can see Pinterest, and what's really interesting about the touch and hold gesture is that it is really a thumb-friendly interaction. Why? Because I can basically tap anywhere I want on a picture I like, and right in place at the tip of my thumb or my finger generally, I'll be shown a radial menu with all the relevant options. So it really is the interface that, you know, comes to meet me, to meet my thumb. Another important aspect of this interaction is that it helps to create an uncluttered user interface. Because what we are actually doing is we are hiding away some options to let them actually be shown only when they are relevant, only on demand, rather than putting them on screen all the time to clutter our user interface. And so the user experience can become also more immersive because we have much more real estate to show content, and beautiful content in this case, in the case of Pinterest, of course. With this app, which is basically an app to search for properties to rent or buy, we can do something very nice. We can actually draw a custom area to look for interesting properties. So this is a very, you know, a very cool example of an unexpected use of a gesture. You can actually draw on a map. And this also enables a relevant feature that wasn't possible otherwise, because how could I anyway else, you know, draw a totally custom area? So it's really interesting. It's actually brilliant. So, okay, we've seen that gestures are interesting, but how to embrace them? I mean, we said, let's try to use them only if they feel natural. Of course, if they are unintuitive, please don't bother to just think of them. But if I want to use gestures, how can I be sure that user will get them and will know that they are in place? Basically, I should draw the attention of users with subtle cues. For example, in the ebook reader on iOS, launching the app and opening the book, I would be able to glimpse the gentle settling down of the bottom right corner of the book page. This subtle animation hints very intuitively to the implied gesture, which is basically swiping to turn over the page. So with little cues like that, I can really put the user in a good condition to know and discover by himself the gestures that I have put in place. So, but if I think that this is not enough, then of course I can introduce coach marks or coach tips. And this is a very, you know, a very used solution to show how to use gestures inside apps. But we should just be aware that during the first time user experience, the first launch of our app, we should avoid to overload the users with too many coach marks and tips. Instead, if we really have lots of things to explain and gestures to present in our app, we should try and adopt a learn-as-you-go approach, just revealing the use of these gestures over time, like we are rewarding the users for their use of our own app. Another guideline is to embrace motion design. Okay, this is something that, of course, can be misinterpreted. We are not talking about just adding motion design and animations just to, make more cool, our UX, because it can actually also get into the way of doing stuff if we overload our app with too many, flashy animations. Actually, motion design should really work in tandem with our design to support the actual and efficient transfer of information to our users. For example, transitions can really help our users to get a hint of what's going on inside my app. And more generally, transitions help facilitate the recall and prevent the users from getting lost into my app. In fact, every abrupt change in a user interface can be hard for a user to grasp. And instead, the transitions and movement helps us to bridge the gap between a certain status, a certain starting status, and a final status, which were started by a user interaction. For example, here you can see a few animations with the classic hamburger menu, and here we can notice that designing animations, we are able to give users a clear sense of where they're coming from and where they're going to. For example, on the first animation, we can see that a layer metaphor is used, whilst in the second one, we use a drawer metaphor. Animation metaphor can really help a user to easily locate themselves inside the app and assign a physical space to what's really happening inside my app. We can also notice that we have morphing for icons. For example, the icon for the menu changes into the X icons to actually close the menu. And so all of this is actually motion design, and it helps the user to grasp what's happening. Here is another animation. We can see a floating button, which is one of the key elements of Google's material design. But here it is shown in the context of an iPhone app, actually. I have chosen this animation as an example because here we can clearly see the nice bouncing effects that is applied to the expansion movement for our speed dial buttons. In fact, also in the previous animations, we had an animation that wasn't uniform or linear, which would be very boring and unbelievable. Basically, we as humans expect to find some believability in the animations we see. We need them to look natural. And for example, we expect that a movement starts slower and then at a later point reaches its full swing. And probably, very likely, it will again slow down when it is reaching its final destination. But there's more than just that. We can enhance actually our user experience with more playful animations, introducing, for example, bouncing or elastic effects. This is not only eye candy, because actually it adds meaning. For example, if we go for a bouncing animation, probably this is very useful to convey that things are docked in that place. You can probably remember the way that we are used in the lock screen for the iPhone to go immediately to the camera. Well, if we don't successfully, slide all the way up our camera icon to actually go to the camera app, then we see the bouncing down of the whole screen, because this is telling me something very specific, that I need to be very intentional about my swipe to actually go to the camera app. So it is also meaningful, not only just eye candy. But how do we go? To do this, to effectively master animations, we have to understand easing functions and apply them properly. Here you can see basically all the easing functions by Robert Penners, and you can also notice the bouncing and the elastic that we were talking about. And these kind of functions were the bread and butter of Flash developers sometimes go, but they really are an essential building block to design motion. It is something that is going to stay. So we should get familiar with them to leverage their huge potential into our own designs. Another guideline is to design for communication. Basically, we should never forget that we are human beings, and so we process, for example, visual information much faster than text. And also, images, of course, affect us both cognitively and emotionally. From a cognitive point of view, they really expedite and increase our level of communication. They increase comprehension, but also recollection and retention. They stick more with our own, memories. They are long-term additions to our memories. And emotionally, they also affect, of course, our attitudes, because graphics engage with our imaginations and heighten also our creative thinking. So if you really have the opportunity to communicate in a more visual way inside our app, we should really, take the opportunity to do that. It has also been essential in many apps, like, Flipboard we were talking about before, but also apps like, Pinterest itself, Stellar, if you know that app, that are really good at communicating visually. Another important guideline is to invest on the first-time user experience, because we already know that we are in a hyper-crowded market, and so we have really to fight for attention. So we should leverage the first user experience right from the start to engage with a good level of communication with our user. So the key facts are that we have, say, 30 seconds to hook new users before they get bored and actually shut down our app. And we have less than 5 minutes to teach them how to use our app, or to at least let them be aware of what our app can do for them. So the problem of discovering features. We also should show off the cool parts, of course, because we want them to stay with us. So, for example, here you can see Vessel, that is basically an app to discover videos that has this kind of walkthrough right at the first launch of the app, to both present the main journey and give some subtle, coach tips for the way you can actually interact with the app. Then we have also here Airbnb, that just focuses on showing off. And it is also a very good example of visual communication. Also, Airbnb is really relying on wonderful pictures of the flats and the houses that it can propose to users. But sometimes we really need to explain something more to users. So we need a more full-fledged tutorial. But the key thing is to avoid to be too wordy and adopt a learn-as-you-go approach. So here, for example, in gaming, it is very, very often used, and here we can see tooltips that happens inside the game to actually take me on during my experience. We should also avoid to prevent users from using our app. This may seem really strange, an odd thing to say. Of course, we don't want to prevent our users to enter our app, but so oftentimes we are forcing registration on users right at the start of our app. And according to players like Tapjoy, it can cause a very, very high drop-off. And even if we are using very light methods like the Facebook Connect, it really depends on the realm, in the market in which our apps is going to be used. For example, if we have a game, probably it is acceptable having a Facebook Connect option, but if I am really obliged to go about that before I can actually see the game, probably I will never open this game again. So it really depends on the app. But anyway, of course we need to register users because it's the business. But how do we go about that? We should allow access as guests, because it is very important to show off before we actually ask something to users. And so we should allow late registration, and it would be great if we could also reward them for actually registering and giving us their own data, of course. This is everything that is important behind the registration in itself. And so here we can see Airbnb. You know, it is an established player, but even Airbnb doesn't force registration on users, because Airbnb knows that it can really be, you know, mesmerizing just to access as a guest the Airbnb experience, look at all those beautiful houses, and actually have a late registration. They are very sure about their business, and they can afford it. And we should also go this way. The final guideline I want to give you, that is a sort of a platinum guideline, is to never ever discount execution, because we may talk for hours about UX design and creating amazing stuff, but the thing is that if we don't really execute in an amazing way, then we are never getting nowhere, actually. And let's say that with the words of Thomas Edison, vision without execution is just hallucination. Thank you very much, guys. So if you have questions, I'm actually going to see, okay, we have 2 questions. One from Tanvi. What considerations, guidelines do you recommend for left versus right-hand users? Well, actually, this is a good question. I've shown the thumb zones for the right-hand users, but actually they can be, you know, mirrored, flip it horizontally to understand how a left-handed user would interact easily and comfortable with the screen, actually. So the thing that we try to do when we design apps is to adopt, whenever possible, a symmetric, you know, layout for buttons, so that flipping the applications really doesn't, you know, change the way we can interact and the ease of use. Another question is about, do you have recommendations for app versus responsive web page? Well, this is a complex question. Of course, this is also something like, you know, philosophy. We can have a war on this, probably, I think. But the basic thing is, Of course, if we really want to access today some of the most amazing, cool features about motion design and something like that, and we want to really have a responsive feel from our app, then we should stick to a native experience, to native development. But at the same time, of course, HTML and HTML5 is improving, is constantly improving, and so it is also possible to adopt, for example, a hybrid strategy. For example, one of the things that I see used most commonly is to create the core parts, the core journeys of the app natively, and then having, corollary pages like, very static parts of the app in HTML, because this enables us to also be able to quickly change those sections without having to, republish again our app on the stores. So an hybrid approach, according to me, is the best way to tackle with the modern, problems and difficulties that we cope with in everyday lives. So yeah, that would be my response.
What would be good ways to handle the error, like the API don't respond anytime?
Yeah, of course, error handling is a very important question, because this is important in every kind of software, really. But when we are on mobility, of course, we often face situations where the connection is not really so that good and something like that. So they are very, very common. And so they should be handled very carefully. How do we do that? Basically, we have to inform the user that his connection is not available, if that's the problem, or for any matter, we should inform the user about an error only if we really cannot recover from that error, because we should strive to, hide as much as possible what's happening behind the scenes, and solve everything that we can actually solve without implying the user's reactions or involvement within the problem. Because as much as we can, keep him safe from and shielded from these details, the better will be his user experience.
You mentioned feedback, assess user feedback.
Yeah.
Some applications, it's like annoying task, you need to go and raise themselves. What would be your recommendation for faster feedback?
That's also an interesting point. When I was talking about user feedbacks, I really meant to talk about measuring data about the usage of my app. But of course, user feedbacks are also important. We see a lot of apps asking aggressively for user feedbacks. But what we're really trying to do is to get a 5 rating, review on the store, because it is important for discoverability. The thing is, we need that. Of course, we need that. Everyone is hungry for user feedbacks and 5-star ratings. It is somewhat of a dark pattern, because some apps do something really, really, really bad. That is, if you want to give me a 5-star review, okay, I can redirect you to the store page where you can actually put in a real review with 5 stars. But if you're going to tell me something ugly or not so nice, then I will show you a form, my own form, to collect your feedbacks, so that your 1-star or 2-star review won't be really entered inside the App Store. And this is a really dark pattern. What we should do is to try and put our requests for reviews in relevant and beautiful moments of our user experience, so that the user is naturally, prone to leave a good review for our app. For example, if we are creating a game, then we can have our request for a rating right after a huge win. This is okay. We can do that because we are not really, doing something crazy. We are just asking for a review, but just in the right moment when probably the user will be more emotionally involved and bound, to be happy and something like that. Yeah. Thank you very much, guys.